President Obama is enjoying a sunny respite in Hawaii, along with some of the reporters who cover him, but he's been getting by far the harshest coverage of his 5 years in office. And that tone was clearly on display at his year-end news conference.
You may not want to call it the worst year of your presidency, but it's clearly been a tough year. The polls have gone up and down, but they are at a low point right now.
How do you expect Americans to have confidence and certainty in this law if you keep changing it?
I'd like to ask you what your reaction was to the nonpartisan truth-telling group PolitiFact when it said that the lie of the year was your statement that if you like your health care plan, you can keep it.
So is the press simply holding the president accountable for a lousy year? Joining us now, Lauren Ashburn, Fox News contributor and author of the top Twitter talk column on FoxNews.com. Judy Miller, Fox News contributor, and Kirsten Powers, columnist for USA Today and the Daily Beast, and also a Fox News contributor. Lauren, I thought the media were having this wonderful romance with Barack Obama. What happened?
I think despite what many people think, the bloom is off the rose. He's been hammered on health care. He's been slapped over the sluggish economy. He's been admonished by access issues by the press. And this has just not been his year. It's been
That's a very alliterative answer.
I know that. I worked on it hard. Annus horribilis, as they say.
And, Judy, you've been through legal wars as a journalist. Was the disclosure of the administration's surveillance of AP and Fox News journalists maybe a turning point this year in the way the press perceives and covers this president?
I think it really was, and it was long overdue, this love affair between Barack Obama and the mainstream media. It took something like the Associated Press, the sustained war on the media, to turn the media around and say, what's going on here? I mean, we have 8 government officials or contractors either in jail or under investigation. That's more than all administrations put together. So they finally woke up.
Kirsten, Judy calls it a love affair, but is there also now a piling on effect as perhaps some journalists try to overcompensate for what might be seen as earlier soft coverage?
I mean, do we really think journalists do that? I don't think people, you do? You think they're because I feel like it's been a long time coming, let's face it.
I think it's like in professional sports. Sometimes refs do make-up calls.
Like in the 5th year?
That's not happening, right? I don't think that's what's
I just feel like this is, if they were going to overcompensate, they could have maybe done it in year 2 or 3 or something. I don't know. Now it just seems that the news is just clearly, I think you very astutely picked out a turning point where people started to say, this is too much. And this is, you can't tell us you're so transparent and different, and then you're spying on, you're basically feel like you're spying on the media.
We strive to be astute on this program.
Now, especially him.
No amount of spin can obscure the fact that the administration's rollout of Obamacare this year was a disaster.
Disastrous on many different levels. He even had, at this point, Clarence Page from the Chicago Tribune turning on him, who is his biggest advocate, saying that, well, he probably lied, but it's a political lie, and sometimes that kind of stuff happens. And the liberal media, Huffington Post, went after him on the botched rollout as well.
Now, it's fascinating. This morning, Judy, Politico has a big piece that says the White House looks to spread Obamacare good news with a flood of success stories. And the Washington Post has a big piece the same day saying Adam Peterson's life is about to change, one of millions of uninsured Americans benefiting from the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
So I think we're going to start to see some media focus, spotlight shifting to those who are getting insurance.
Well, we actually should have that happen. I mean, that's the normal course of news coverage.
It's part of the story.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, the people who have lost their coverage, who have to get more expensive coverage, all of that, it's not like the media are going to forget about that.
No, but nor have they ignored it. I mean, this was a huge focus, belated to be sure, but at long last, a legitimate focus on an issue that needed attention.
But is the idea that Obamacare is getting better, even though as some millions of people who had no coverage at all are able to sign up, is that going to be a tough sell for, hard-bitten media types?
Well, I think over time, if Obamacare starts to function properly and all these people who have had their health insurance disrupted, they get their health insurance, it all gets sorted out, that stops being a story, right? I mean, the story about him lying stops being a story. The story about people losing their health insurance
stops being a story, or just fades into the background?
Yeah, well, people aren't gonna. What I'm saying is they've already lost their insurance, right? So unless there's another group of people who loses their insurance, that story will recede because it's eventually old news, and the new news is the people who are getting insurance and are actually benefiting from Obamacare.
I think it's going to be harder at that point for the media to stay focused on two stories. I think we often talk about on this program ADD and how the media have a very hard time focusing on one thing. And now you've got the stories of people who are going to say, oh, I'm so happy, this is so great. And the rabble-rousers aren't going to get as much attention.
ADD, what did you just say? Okay, but despite the popular perception, there's another thing here. And I don't mean to suggest that journalists only act because they're happy or glad or mad or sad at the administration they are covering. But there are serious tensions now between journalists, the White House press office, and Jay Carney. About a whole range of issues.
Well, I think, there always are tensions, but it has exploded in this year. In 2013, you have the White House Press Photographers Association launching formal complaints against the White House for using their own internal photographer, Pete Souza, who's fabulous, but he is not a member of the press. He's there to capture intimate moments, but sometimes what's happening is that the news media isn't even invited to certain events, and the White House is bringing people in to have one-on-one interviews with White House people and not even telling the press, which is outrageous.
But this was going on in the first administration. I don't know why it didn't come up before he was reelected. There was a Politico story, I think a year ago about, they called the Puppet Master, and it was all about these things. This White House TV, it's very Orwellian, where they just create their own news and they do the interviews. And
they're entitled to do whatever they want, like every administration, to get the message out. They're not even meeting with
their beat reporters. I mean, they hadn't met with the New York Times beat reporter in a year. That's just unacceptable.
And here's another thing, Judy. President Obama takes relatively few questions at these photo ops, and the press is ushered in for a few moments. He took 107 in his first term. Usually it's 1 and 2 news of the day questions, compared to President George W. Bush, 354 in his first term. And that's a vital way of getting the president on the record in the day-to-day news coverage.
Absolutely, and it hasn't happened. And if we go back to the photographers again, because in our culture so much is the presentation, the picture. When you're invited as a White House photographer twice in a year into the Oval Office, and both times you're taking a picture of the president on the phone, really scintillating photography. I mean, you've got a problem there. And his New Year's resolution was he's going to reach out more to the press. I'm not sure they're going to like that either.
But he did, if you remember, in the very beginning, he was overexposed. But he was not just reaching out to the White House press, as you say, but it was People magazine. It was doing all of these different spreads. Michelle Obama.
And he continues to do Leno and The View and ESPN. He had Steve Harvey in, and the White House says, look, President gives 3 to 4 as many interviews as either George W. Bush or Bill Clinton, but they're not always
the hard note.
They're softball.
They're softball.
Not all. Many of them.
Many of them are softball interviews.
All right.